cleaning plaque from arteries may seem like an impossible task. But what if I told you that there are 5 foods that have strong evidence, research evidence, that they can help you clean that plaque out of your arteries and reduce your risk of heart attacks? Now, we're not talking about taking a roto-rooter in there. We're not talking about taking a squeegee brush inside your arteries. Here's what we're actually talking about. We're talking about calming down your metabolism and therefore actually even slowing down the risk of heart attack and stroke by stabilizing that plaque. And in the studies that we're going to show you today, you're going to actually even see plaque reversal. Dr. Fordham Brewer. I'm a preventive medicine doctor with over 40 years of clinical experience. Clinical means actually seeing patients. Let's go straight to food number 1. Nuts. Nuts are like a daily polish for your artery walls. Because when you look at an actual ultrasound picture of the arteries, nuts are one of the few foods that shows up making a measurable difference in plaque. And again, to repeat, measurable difference in plaque. Now, in this food and the next food that we'll talk about, we looked at this study called PREDIMED, P-R-E-D-I-M-E-D. It's a big Spanish study. Most docs in prevention are familiar with that study. The Mediterranean diet plus 30 grams of mixed nuts a day, walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts. A Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil. Or a standard low-fat control diet, with control as the standard for health. There was a subgroup that had detailed ultrasound of the neck, the arteries in the neck called the carotids. For those of you who've seen our channel before, it's CIMT, Carotid Intima Media Thickness Test. It's a test where you measure the width of the artery wall. You're looking at plaque. They looked at the thickness of the artery wall, and they looked at the height of the plaque, the actual bump of plaque sticking out into the artery. Here's what they found with nuts. In the control group, the low-fat group, plaque in the internal carotid artery kept growing about over the year of the study. In the nut group, plaque growth slowed down. And guess what? The plaque growth not only slowed, but in many people, it actually went backwards. They saw a reduction in maximum plaque height of about 0.09 millimeters compared with the control diet. Now, wait a minute. 0.09 millimeters? That's nothing, right? No, in terms of CIMT, we're talking about the width of a human hair. The width of a human hair in terms of the thickness of plaque and artery walls is a big deal. So changes of a fraction of a millimeter are linked to a big difference in heart attack risk over time. Mechanistically, what's going on here? As I mentioned, nuts are helping by improving triglycerides, reducing inflammation, reducing oxidative stress, supporting better endothelial function. Endothelium, that's the lining of the artery wall. Now, let me stop here for just a second and talk about each of those very quickly. What does improving triglycerides got to do with this? Let's go back and talk about what insulin resistance prediabetes actually is. Your cells are getting resistant to insulin, so they don't pull sugar out of the blood where it can cause danger by wrecking the artery wall and pulling it into the cell. So what happens then if you're insulin resistant is your blood sugar starts going up. Immediately cells in your brain, nuclei in your brain begin to recognize that. Those nuclei tell your pancreas, put out more insulin. So now you've got increased insulin and increased blood sugar. What's this got to do with triglycerides? As you increase your insulin, it impacts your ability to burn triglycerides. In fact, increased insulin tells you to deposit more fats. It's a fat deposition. It's a growth hormone. So what started as simply insulin resistance quickly becomes increase in blood sugar, increase in insulin, and increase in triglycerides or blood fats. Thank you for hanging in there with the geek part, but that helps you understand why nuts are such a big deal. They're not roto-rootering the plaque. What they're doing is improving your metabolism. You see that by decreased triglycerides, decreased inflammation, or oxidative stress. And therefore, you end up seeing better endothelial function or function of the lining of the artery wall. Now that we've gotten past all that science, let's talk for a minute about basic practical stuff. How do you eat nuts? Daily target, about 30 grams, a small handful of mixed nuts per day. Unless it's my hand, it's a little bit big, but a small handful. Again, as we said, in the PREDIMED study, that Spanish study, they looked at walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts. I'd recommend macadamia nuts and pecans because of fewer carbs. Now, what's the timing? Like so many things in life, that depends. If you're a person who's still eating a lot of highly processed snacks like cookies or chips, eat nuts instead of those cookies and chips and highly processed food. If you've already graduated into not eating snacks, make these nuts part of your meal. How do I do it? I have salads about 4 or 5 times a week, and I'll just put nuts on top of my salad for something crunchy. I used to be addicted to breads until I found out that I was pre-diabetic and then full diabetic. So instead of having croutons on my salads, I have nuts on my salads. Now, some people would say, be sure to use unsalted nuts. If you're low carb already, you don't need to worry so much about salt. In fact, you need more salt than you did before when you were eating a lot of carbs. That's got to do with insulin and insulin-like growth factor and its impact on the kidneys. We're not going to go there right now. One thing to definitely remember, no matter what group you're in, don't get these almonds that are coated in chocolate. The sugar in that chocolate undoes the good stuff coming from these nuts. Think of your daily handful of nuts as a simple, tasty way to help your artery walls stay smoother, cleaner, less inflamed over the long haul. Food number 2, extra virgin olive oil, the foundation fat of a plaque healing diet. Let's go back to that same PREDIMED study. Obviously, the researchers there were not carnivores. They were not low carbers. But even though they weren't, they collected information that helps us understand, as carnivores or low carbers, what helps. And as I said in the beginning, this is not so much about plaque reversal. That's great to talk about, cleaning arteries. But the big deal is decreased risk. Speaking of which, did they actually get a decreased risk? The PREDIMED study looked at that. They looked at major heart attack and cardiovascular events, and they matched 30% lower rate of heart attack, stroke, and other major cardiovascular events. So extra virgin olive oil is not just less bad than other fats, it's actively associated with, let's go back and remember what this really talks about, what this really means. Less inflammation, better HDL function, lower triglycerides, thicker, more stable caps on the plaque, a stabilization of inflammation, and a better metabolism. Now let's go back and again, like we did with nuts, talk about the practical ways to do this. Dose goal. Aim for 2 to 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil per day per person. Use it as a replacement for other fats, maybe, or again, if you're comfortable with other fats like saturated fats, if you're a carnivore, use that. Butter is clearly a great way to go if you're okay with that. And if you're not worried about saturated fats, I personally am not. Margarines and seed oils, yeah, there's a lot of hoopla, a lot of concern about it. I use the term hoopla. There's a lot of debate about seed oils and margarine. I just tend to avoid them. The science I don't think is that great regarding seed oils, but who cares? Just don't take them, and you don't have to worry about whether you're right or wrong interpreting the science. Get healthy fats and leave it at that. Now, the best uses as a salad dressing, which I do, you can use with vinegar or lemon, or you can do what I do, use olive oil with apple cider vinegar, ACV. You can drizzle this olive oil over cooked vegetables, fish, soups. What do you look for? The label should say extra virgin. You need to have this in a dark glass bottle, not plastic. We're not going to go down that bunny hole, but dark glass. Why dark? So that the light doesn't come in and disrupt the chemicals in olive oil that are important. You want harvest dates or best by dates. Again, I focus mostly on the glass bottle and making sure that it's extra virgin. There is a lot of adulteration of olive oil in the oil supply. Again, that's another thing to be aware of, but it's something we cover in another video. What you want is more polyphenols. That's where the extra virgin comes in, and that's a good sign. Now, what's the good sign? A slight peppery, bitter taste when you take it, and it may make you cough. That's when you know you've probably got some pretty good EVOO, extra virgin olive oil. Every time you reach for that instead of processed oils or seed oils, you're probably nudging your arteries towards less inflammation and more stability. Food number 3, dark leafy greens, carrots, and tomatoes. Really? Yes. Carotenoids. You ever heard those? They thin the artery wall. They're chemicals that you find in carrots, greens, and tomatoes. The colorful plant groups. And again, carnivores, I know we got a lot of carnivores in our audience. You don't have to listen to this. Maybe skip over to the next one. But those of us who eat plant material, colorful plant groups, dark leafy greens, carrots, tomatoes. These foods are rich in carotenoids, natural pigments like beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, lutein, zeaxanthin. There was a large study that looked at over 3,700 middle-aged and older adults. It measured both their dietary intake and blood levels of carotenoids, and then compared that to ultrasound measurements of their neck, again, that carotid IMT. Here's what they found. People with the highest blood levels of these carotenoids had thinner artery walls. Their CIMT was about 0.03 to 0.04 millimeters lower than those with the lowest levels, even after adjusting for blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, and more. So again, the proper adjustments were done, and you saw a small but significant difference associated with carotenoids. The strongest links were for beta-carotene, alpha-carotene, and lutein plus zeaxanthin. These are heavily supplied by leafy greens and orange vegetables like carrots. Lycopene, that was from tomatoes. It was great for blood pressure and general vascular health. But its independent association with IMT was weaker in this particular study compared with the other carotenoids. So in plain terms, people who eat and absorb more of these colorful plant pigments tend to have measurably thinner artery walls. Again, all of that mechanism and science and evidence, that's great, but how do you eat them? Well, focus on 2 daily habits. Dark leafy greens. I get them 5-6 days a week. Spinach, kale, collards, Swiss chard, romaine. Aim for at least 1 to 2 cups of cooked or raw dark green vegetables 4, 5, 6 times a week. Combine these sources with a fat source like olive oil, avocado, or nuts, because carotenoids are fat soluble and they absorb much better with fat. Again, be careful with sugars in tomato pastes, but if you can get a good low-carb source for tomatoes, the healthiest, the easiest, the most reliable is just tomatoes. Put some tomatoes in your salad. Here's a simple example. A salad with mixed greens, shredded carrots, extra virgin olive oil, in the dressing maybe some apple cider vinegar, a side of tomato salad, or just put tomatoes in the salad itself. These foods don't act like a Roto-Rooter overnight, as we discussed earlier. But taken on a regular basis, they are linked to arteries that are measurably thinner and healthier. Food number 4, salmon and other omega-3 rich fish. This shrinks dangerous plaque. Again, we're talking about plaque reversal here, not even just stabilization, but reversal. And overall, the reversal, as I said, is not the important thing. The important thing is stabilization of your metabolism. Salmon and other fatty fish are rich in omega-3 fats, EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA. These have been studied in people who already have plaque using advanced imaging. Guess which one? Yep, the ultrasound-based CIMT. Also, CT angiograms and IVUS. It's a more technical item. It's tiny intravascular devices looking with ultrasound inside the coronary arteries. Obviously, you're not going to do that very much. But you've got some studies in this space looking at omega-3s with that technology. When researchers pooled 7 imaging trials, they found omega-3 fats reduced total plaque volume in the coronary arteries. In some of the CT angiogram studies, people with higher omega-3 intake had less non-calcified plaque and far fewer high-risk plaques, the soft inflamed plaques that are most likely to rupture and cause a heart attack. So, bottom line, more evidence about something that most of us knew already. Omega-3 rich fish are not just improving triglycerides, they're changing your plaque itself, making that plaque smaller even, believe it or not, reversing it, and most of all, making that plaque less dangerous. Here's the practical stuff. How to eat salmon and other omega-3 fish. Aim for 2 to 3 servings per week. I get about 4 to 5 usually. Examples, the mash fish, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, sardines, herring. Portion, 3 to 4 ounces, the size of your palm per serving. How do you cook them? Depends on which fish you're talking about. You can bake, you can grill, you can pan sear in extra virgin olive oil. Avoid deep frying. It adds some inflammatory oils. At least that's what it appears to do. And it may damage the more delicate fats. So what about supplements? A high-quality omega-3 supplement with EPA, much more EPA than anything else, but also EPA and a little bit of DHA. This can mimic much of the effect seen in plaque studies. That's been demonstrated. But again, look at the doses and look at the interactions before you make your choice. Think of salmon and other fatty fish as construction crews in your arteries, quietly remodeling that plaque to be smaller and more stable over time. Food number 5. Any guesses on what it is? I used to take this stuff and then I decided it had too much sugars, so I stopped. And now I'm reconsidering. If you're still guessing, it's pomegranate. Pomegranate juice has actually been studied. Small doses, big impact. Researchers took patients with carotid artery stenosis, meaning significant narrowing in the neck arteries that feed the brain. We're talking about specifically stroke risk here. They gave half of these people about 50 milliliters of pomegranate juice per day. That's less than a quarter of a cup. The others continued their usual diet. They did not add any pomegranate juice. Here's what happened. Over 1 year, the control group had a carotid CIMT increased by about 9%. In other words, their plaque was still growing. In the pomegranate juice group, the CIMT decreased by up to 30%. So we're talking about actual reversal of plaque with a juice that was very sweet. And this was not compared to others. This was compared to their own baseline. Now, if you say, oh, well, that's freaky. And it is a big deal because look, remember we talked in the very beginning of this study or this video that a 1% decrease can decrease the cardiovascular risk by 25%. Does that mean they had absolutely zero risk? No, it doesn't. We need to be realistic here. This is science looking at biological processes. But it's a big positive sign. Now, let's look at another sign just to say, well, maybe there was some freak differences going on here. How about systolic blood pressure? They measured that. These people had a decrease in their systolic blood pressure by about 12%. Again, these are very significant, very positive markers of decreased risk for heart attack and stroke. How about oxidative stress, cholesterol oxidation? These also improved again dramatically. Cholesterol tended to oxidize 59% less, all the way up to 90% less, depending on the measure that they looked at. Overall, antioxidant status roughly doubled. Even when some of these patients continued the juice for 3 years, the biggest changes in IMT, that thickness in the neck, and antioxidant markers, that happened in the first year. So what we're talking about here is you make the biggest changes when you're at the highest risk. When you begin to slow that down, you make big changes. That's when plaque shrinkage is the most evident. Now, what about blood sugar? Again, that's why I stopped pomegranate juice myself in the beginning. Because pomegranate juice is still juice. You might worry about glucose spikes, like I did. And glucose spikes they're not innocuous. They're not harmless. Here's the reassuring part for pomegranate juice. When researchers gave pomegranate juice and compared it to sugar-matched drinks, even though it's sweet, the blood sugar spike was similar or smaller with pomegranate juice. And why would that be? Maybe it's because of those polyphenols. Maybe they slow down how quickly the sugar is absorbed. Also, maybe it changes the hormone response, like insulin and incretins. We're not going to go too much deeper on that, but here's what they found with meta-analysis. Meta-analysis of pomegranate products, the juices and the extracts, showed small improvements in fasting blood sugar and insulin resistance. This was measured by HOMA-IR, which I have problems with, but again, it's evidence that I can get from a study, even if I did not agree with the researchers in terms of their assumptions, the evidence I could take. So pomegranate does contain sugar, but if used correctly, it doesn't behave like a can of soda. How do you use pomegranate juice and safely for plaque regression? Because you care about both plaque and glucose spikes, treat pomegranate juice like a targeted therapy. Keep the dose small. Use 50 to 100 milliliters per day. That's about 1.5 to 3 ounces, similar to the carotid stenosis study. Avoid large glasses. I know something sweet like that tastes good. You want to just get a bunch of it. Don't get 250 to 300 milliliters. We're talking about small doses on a regular basis, 4 to 6 times a week. And again, especially if you have prediabetes or diabetes like me, don't get these large doses. Always take it with a meal as well. Combine it with protein and fat, for example. Salmon with a big leafy green salad, dressed in extra virgin olive oil, a handful of nuts, a small shot glass of pomegranate juice with the meal. That works. This slows the stomach emptying and helps flatten the glucose rise that you might see from the pomegranate juice. Avoid stacking carbs. Don't drink pomegranate juice on top of a high-carb meal and a dessert. If the meal's already heavy in a starch, skip the pomegranate juice that time. Or just use a very, very small dose. Now, here's what I did even when I was worried about the sugars and the sugar spikes in pomegranate juice. I used extracts. And again, for diabetics, extracts may be a better choice. If blood sugar's fragile, use pomegranate extract capsules, standardized for polyphenols. It captures the vascular benefits with minimal sugar. If you have a home glucose meter, run your own mini experiment. Check your blood sugar just before a meal. Take your usual small pomegranate dose with that meal, and check again at 1 to 2 hours. And 1 and 2 hours. Half an hour, 1 hour, and 2 hours. If your post-meal rise is moderate or modest, for many that's going to be less than 30 to 40 milligrams per deciliter. You've likely found a safe way to use pomegranate as part of your artery regression toolkit. There's yet one meal, though, when combined with the right lifestyle, gets the best results. Check out this video right here. Remember this, growing old's not for sissies. It is a lot easier with healthy arteries. And if you're in your 30s and 40s, don't wait till you're my age to figure that out.